Welcome back to Truth is Freedom. I'm Dennis Cummins, and I'm so glad that you're part of our second episode. Our special guest, Mark Herr, the co-founder for Center for Self-Governance. And we're talking about this new proposed commission, the Domestic Terrorist Study and Domestic Violent Extremism. And basically, we're talking about the ability for them to remove due process from an ambiguous term, because they can use their labels on whomever they want and then weaponize the health department to be able to take care or deal with these people or reprogram these people. We're already seeing it with Jordan Peterson in Canada on how they're trying to deal with him. And of course, Canada is the canary in the mine to America of what's coming next. So, Mark, welcome back. Let's jump back into this and talk about due process, because when we had foreign terrorists come to America, everybody went, they're terrorists, so no due process, send them to Guantanamo. But now we have U.S. citizens that they can basically use whatever definition that they want to label you or me, and then use the health department to deal with you. And there's no review, there's no trial, there's no ability to be judged by your peers.
Well, one of the tenets of due process starts with the presumption that you are innocent until you are proven guilty. This flips that entire process upside down on its head and says, you are a heretic and a witch, and then we will prove your innocence. And if you drown, you must have been innocent, right? Okay. And if you floated to the top, oh yeah, demons, witches. Okay. This is such a dangerous precedent being set in the 21st century, and it's not progressive at all. It's actually a regression back to those days that I'm describing. And so one of the recommendations in this report is to fund, empower certain departments within the executive branch. One of those is the Department of Health. And this idea that racism is a health crisis, and you might have heard this over the last 5 to 10 years, this phrase, racism is a health crisis. Now, notice that the commission report refers to the general rise of white supremacy and anti-government ideologies. They tie these two together. And the reason for that is because they believe that our system of government is inherently racist, not because it has any value. It's dysfunctional from the beginning because it is racist. That's what they believe.
Right.
So when they say racism is a health crisis and they weaponize the labels in concert with these ambiguous definitions, they're now using the third component, which is to weaponize it in the health department because it's a mental health crisis. Dennis, your pastor, Dennis he's mental, he doesn't even know his white supremacy, his white nationalism, his white patriarchy, his white, okay? Mm-hmm. Hence, since he can't see it, we need to help him see it. And so the paper says that Washington will be the first, if they implement this commission and implement its recommendations, to implement this idea of using the Department of Health and its resources to partner with a community hub, a civic education hub, where people in the community build resilience against this rising threat. I'm going to put it in quotes because I can make the argument that I don't agree with their statistics, but or their experts, or what they mean by extreme and diverse stakeholders.
Yes.
Or their labels. Okay. But what I'm saying is that by empowering the Department of Health and creating this new community civic education hub, partnering them together with an intergovernmental cooperation model, they can then start to identify people that they label as on the path to radicalization or the path to extremism that may lead to acts of violence. Mm-hmm. So again, it's very general. It's based on their ideology. It's not applied to all Washingtonians.
Right.
And it creates this intergovernmental cooperation model where you now bring the citizenry in, where they can begin to report on their family, report on their community members, and then have these interdiction models that the Department of Health would use to de-radicalize, to reprogram, re-educate, etc.
So
and it's literally written in the paper, literally.
Right. Oh,
So
I know. They're not hiding anything.
no,
So they want to purge law enforcement, especially the sheriff's departments, because they are the sheriff is the highest authority in the county itself. And so they want to purge those mindsets, and they want to purge the church. For the most part, I would say a good portion of churches in America, in Washington, are not standing where they should. There are many that are. But what I see is this is all around the rainbow alphabet protections, and so that they can continue to thrust forward their agenda. And if you speak out against that, or not even speak out against it, but just one thing that we hold true to is, biblical marriage is one man, one woman, two genders, biblical sexuality, the right to life from the womb to the tomb. We believe in the rule of law with responsible policing, and we believe that we're all created equal. And as far as I'm concerned, those thoughts are considered to be extreme, and those thoughts will be targeted. And because that's going to literally make many passages in the scripture illegal to read. If in other words, avoid it. Other words, it's going to be a landmine that's going to blow up in your face, and the health department is going to get you and take you away. Now, when I say that, I know some people are sitting there going, oh, no, this is crazy. What? This is so, conspiracy theory. Why are you even?
The facts, right? And this is again why it's important for people to understand, if the domestic violent extremism cases are being overinflated, then that becomes a basis of justifying this report. So that should be a concern to whoever, whether you're pro or anti whatever the issue is. That should be a concern. The second is the due process. If it applies to me, should it apply to you? And if it applies to you, should it apply to me? In other words, is it an all or is it a some question? We should have that conversation. The third piece that you're bringing up here is your right to thought or speech or discussion, or
Yes.
et cetera. I call this the Puritan Quaker paradox. Right now, the Puritans have control of the system, and they're in effect labeling you Quaker, right? And your doctrine doesn't fit within their model or their ideas of how things should work.
Mm-hmm.
So now it turns into labels, ambiguous definitions with weaponized government. And that's what we're describing. We're not describing, well, they're going to come for the Christians, or they're come. Here's the statistics. Here's the reality. Of the 120 plus so-called pro-life institutions that have either been vandalized, damaged, or had threats, there's not been a single arrest. Okay, now I'm going to compare this. I'm going to compare this to Supreme Court justices regarding the abortion question, being threatened, coerced, intimidated outside their homes, that kind of stuff. Not a single arrest except for one case where the person actually admitted he was going to murder or assassinate one of the Supreme Court justices. But in terms of actually coercing or intimidating, which is under the federal law, which is in this definition, in this document, they use Title 18, Section 2331, Part 5, and they list it in here. They don't, well, they list it in their footnotes, but they list the acts of violence: coerce or intimidate a civilian population, coerce or intimidate government policy, Dobbs decision, coerce or affect the conduct of business, which puts fear in so that can they conduct their business. And my point is like, I'm not talking about the pro-life or the anti-abortion. I'm not even the issue, just the system itself.
Right.
When you compare and contrast 120 plus institutions with violence committed, not a single arrest, then coercing and intimidating government, business, government policy, etc., not a single arrest, then you compare that to how many so-called pro-life protesters are now being charged this year. There's going to be many
peaceful protesters, lawful protesters.
And we can go down those rabbit holes, like 2020, the journalist, and there's buildings burning. It's mostly peaceful protests. When we compare the two, and that's what I would encourage your audience who's like going, you're a conspiracy. Time out. Compare and contrast. I'm not saying on the issue.
Right.
Our civil society should be able to have debates on issues.
Yeah.
That's
open dialogue. Absolutely.
But something's wrong when the system, when the Puritan Quaker paradox is in effect.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we're seeing that. And that's the alarm bells that I'm sounding. I'm like, BIPOC communities, yes, I can see it. They have been disproportionately at the local level targeted. I call it driving while black, not driving under the influence, driving while black, and they get pulled over more disproportionately than any other demographic in the United States.
Uh-huh.
Those statistics are not inflated that we know of. So,
Right.
you know what I mean? So now
Yeah.
we're kind of in this world of, well, what do we trust in terms of stats? And I think that's kind of what you're seeing, Pastor Dennis, is the conspiracy theories. They don't, number one, don't want to believe it's true.
Yeah.
Number two is they can't see it for themselves. And so I would encourage them to compare and contrast
Well,
how many pro-life versus how many coerce intimidates,
yep.
arrested, not arrested, in prison, tried, charged, etc. Compare and contrast. And that's why this is an important issue for your congregation and listeners to pay attention
Mark,
to.
let's talk about school boards and moms and dads that want to go and talk to the school boards or confront the school boards concerning their agendas or their policies. And how are parents being targeted? Are they considered to be these DVEs?
Yes, you're bringing up this one is a huge. Okay, so September of last year, the National School Board Association sent a letter to President Biden saying that threats were increasing against school board members across the United States. And what it was an increase in the number of parents showing up to school board meetings. So even though their document didn't specific, it's kind of like critical race theory. We're not teaching critical race theory. Well, you're teaching the tenets of it. You know,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, argument.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm for or against. I'm just saying
Uh-huh.
that argument. It's the same thing. Well, we never said parents in our letter. Well, 9 out of 10 people showing up to the thing were parents, and they were getting heated because they were like, oh, why aren't you listening to, they were getting frustrated. It's their kids, it's passion, emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Attorney General Garland, which is like Attorney General Ferguson of Washington. Okay, they're very, these guys are the top law enforcement officers in your state and in the nation, okay, related to law and prosecution and safety and all that stuff. Attorney General Garland sent a memo to all 50 plus FBI detachments in the United States and saying, and the memo you can find, it's October 4th, 2021. In this memo, he's directing them to partner with local partners at the school boards to identify these threats. And so soon after that letter was released, parents across the United States began to be cited and trespassed or arrested for showing up. And these are stats, these are facts. Like in Washington, there are at least 20 plus parents in the state who have been cited or trespassed for showing up at school board meetings. This happens after the memo. The same time, the Department of Homeland Security created a threat reporting system, primarily being tested, my understanding is in Utah. However, when you say overinflating domestic violent extremism cases, mm-hmm. If the school is saying, well, we had to cite this parent, we felt threatened, we felt coerced, we felt intimidated. Okay. Then they're spreading online disinformation. And now they're trying to infiltrate the government by getting elected. Okay, that's the language I'm seeing in this paper.
Yes.
Which is also very disconcerting because it's like, what is the right to participate in society then?
Right.
Okay. Anyway, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. So the threats, where are those threats going? Congressman Jim Jordan, I think he's from Ohio or somewhere. He's now the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in Congress. He's also the chairman of the Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. One of the things he's going to study is the threat tags that were assigned to these parents and the communication between the school board and these federal agencies. Did those citing and trespasses, did those transfer into their threat reporting system? And is that inflating the DVE cases? Mm-hmm. Super critical. So and if I may, I would recommend, if any parent has been cited or trespassed in any state, you need to write down what happened that day, and what were the consequences, cited, trespassed, arrested, etc. And I highly recommend that you either pass it through your congressman to that select committee, or you go directly to that select committee yourself and hand them your affidavit, have it notarized as your testimony of what happened to you, because it's over 1,400 cases that I'm aware of across the United States. And parents showing up on behalf of their children in this state is a whole nother conversation, Pastor Dennis. That
Yeah.
the policy in this state is not pro-parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
There are parental rights and there is parental law, but parenthood is not a institution that has any respect within the policy mechanisms of the state. And so you can see that bearing it out by the way parents were treated. There's one example I want to give you. Her name is Stacy Mosier. She's from Oroville, Washington.
Yeah.
Her husband is a school board member, Polo Mosier. And both of them went through hell these last 2 years. I'm not saying that lightheartedly. She was literally cited and trespassed and threatened with arrest when she was attending her son's sporting event. Her husband was talking with parents who were concerned about the policies and things that were being implemented in the school district, and as a school board member was talking with those constituents. The administration, in collusion with a statewide agency, I'm not going to name them here, they went after him with more than $50,000 in investigations to get him to try to resign or to prosecute him. This is deeply concerning, is deeply troubling, because here's a mom, here's a school board member. Their kids are going to the school and they're involved in their child's education, but they're cited, trespassed, threatened with arrest, investigated, trying to press to resign, threatened with prosecution. The intimidation piece is where you see the weaponization of government. So
Right.
that's an example of one of those cases where, if you've been through that, write it down, have it notarized, someone witnesses that is your true testimony, get it to the Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. Number two, Pastor Dennis, they should contact their representative for the state to have this conversation about this commission report.
Awesome. Well, I tell you what, we're going to come back in just a moment in our third episode on this. And I want to talk about what are we going to do about this? How do we engage? How do we intervene while we still have free speech and fight for, in a metaphorical way, fight for our right to continue to uphold the Constitution that affords us these rights. So thank you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll be back on our third episode.